We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Hey Amid Beis Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 35b. And the previous Amid the Gemara was discussing why the cheese of Ovdei Kochavim, the cheese of idol worshippers, is forbidden to eat. One possible suggestion one might make is that they use the stomach contents, that's the intestinal fluids, of non-kosher animals in order to make that cheese. But that's not a good answer because non-kosher animals, the intestinal fluids of non-kosher animals, are actually not able to curdle the cheese. So that cannot be the reason. Another possible suggestion is that they're using animals that are nevela. It would be a kosher animal that wasn't slaughtered properly. And the problem with giving that answer, that's already a discussion within the Mishnah, because in general, the perish of these kinds of animals, the excrement of these kind of animals, is not considered problematic because it's not really considered anything substantial. It's not considered to be like food. And so Shmuel on the previous summit, he suggested that they actually use the ore of the keva. They use the skin of the stomach of these animals, which are nevela, and that's why it's problematic. And the Gemara said on the previous summit, that implies that Shmuel holds, kind of like our Mishnah, that the perish of the keva is actually not a problem, because again, it's not considered to be anything significant. But the problem is that Shmuel explains the Mishnah in Chulin that the perish of the keva is actually problematic. The intestinal fluids are actually forbidden. And so the Gemara continues now and answers, Kan kodem chazara, kan liachar chazara. That was before the retraction, and that was after the retraction, meaning to say, essentially, we really do have a contradiction in Mishnayos. The Mishnah in Chulin seems to be saying that perish is forbidden, and our Mishnah seems to be saying that perish is not forbidden, and the idea is that there's a chazara over here, there's a retraction, Mishnah lo zazam imekoma, and the original Mishnah, that's the Mishnah Meseches Chulin, that does not move from its place. We kept the Mishnah in its place, even though really we do retract the opinion in that Mishnah. Rashi explains, Kan kodem chazara osa Mishnah de shchitas chulin, that Mishnah in shchitas chulin, de kevas ovid kochavim nevela vasura, that again the stomach contents of the ovid kochavim nevela, that means to say an idolater slaughtered the animal, so it's a nevela, it is asur. So nishnas kodem shechazar bo Rabbi Yoshua midvarav, that was learned before Rabbi Yoshua retracted his opinion. The discussion in our Mishnah was between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yoshua, and when Rabbi Yishmael asked his questions to Rabbi Yoshua essentially retracted and said that the perish is not a problem. Sha'amar lo Rabbi Yishmael mibnei shema'amidin osa bekevas nevela, because again Rabbi Yoshua initially said that the problem with the cheese of Ovdei Kochavim is that they curdle it with kevas nevela. V'savar lav pirsha, he had originally thought that it's not pirsha, and therefore he said that that's what makes it a problem. V'kan li'achar chazar, but then this is after retraction. Hach deshani Shmuel mibnei shema'amidin osa be'or, when Shmuel says that the actual problem is they're using the skin of the keva, aval keva atzma sharia, but the stomach itself is permitted. Li'achar chazara, that's after the retraction. Shechazar bo Rabbi Yeshua changed his mind, mimnei teshuvaso shel Rabbi Yishmael, because of the response of Rabbi Yishmael. U'mishnah hanishnas b'shchitas chulin, in the Mishnah that was taught in Meseches Chulin, kodem chazara, that was before the retraction, and lo zazam imakom, it doesn't move from its place. Lo akrua legamri, they don't totally uproot it. The whole nishnas, since it was learned in Meseches, since it's found in Meseches Chulin, it was taught in Meseches Chulin, it was taught. Avalein halacha kamosa, but the halacha is not like that Mishnah, sharei chazar bo, because again Rabbi Yeshua retracted in terms of that opinion. And the Gemara continues with another explanation why the cheese of Ovdei Kochavim might be prohibited. Rav Malkiya mishmei de Ravada bar Rava Omar, Rav Malkiya in the name of Ravada bar Rava says, mimnei shemachlikin poneh, because they put a shine on the outside, b'shuman chazir, with the fat of a pig, and that's actually why it's problematic. Rav Chisda says, the reason is that they actually curdle that cheese, they create that cheese using vinegar. Rashi explains, it's possible to use the chometz as an agent in order to create the cheese, and so therefore the chometz of Ovdei Kochavim, that could be problematic because it has the wine of Ovdei Kochavim. Rashi says, later on the Gemara is going to ask on this explanation, if that's the case, it actually should be forbidden to get any benefit, because we're concerned there of the wine of Avoda Zara, of Yayin Nesach. And the Gemara continues with another answer regarding the cheese. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Mimnei shema'amidin osa b'srafa arla. The reason is they use the sap of arla. The sap of arla. Arla are fruits in the first 3 years that are forbidden, and so therefore that could create a problem. In terms of the cheese, if that's the way that they are making the cheese. And the Gemara continues, Keman, who does that follow? Ki haitana. It follows the Tana in the following Mishnah, the Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Mishnah says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Hamaimid Bisrafa Orla Aser. Again, if somebody is going to create, he's going to use the sap of Orla as a maimid in order to create cheese, or in order as an agent, it is forbidden. Mimneshi Piri, because that's considered to be fruit. The sap is considered to be fruit. And so therefore this seems to be going, this answer of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak seems to be going like Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara says not necessarily Afilu Tamer Rabbi Yoshua. You could even say it follows Rabbi Yoshua, because Adkan lo polig Rabbi Yoshua led to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Yoshua was only arguing on Rabbi Eliezer. Ela bekatva de guza. He was talking about the sap that comes out of the tree itself. Aval bekatva de pira. But let's say you have sap that comes from the fruit, modi. So then even Rabbi Yoshua would admit, everybody would admit that that's considered like arla, and it's aser. V'hainu d'tanan, and that's what we learned in the Mishnah. Am Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua says, Shamati befeirish ha'maimid bisrafa olin uvisrafa ikarin mutter. I heard explicitly that if somebody uses as an agent the sap of the leaves or the sap of the roots, that's mutter. But bisrafa pagan, but if he's using the sap of the unripe fruits, aser, that is forbidden, mibneshu piri, because that's considered to be like fruits. And the Gemara continues, Bein Rav Chisda, Bein Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, whether you're following Rav Chisda or whether we're following Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, titzar b'hana, so if it's because of, again, the chometz, which has wine of yayin nesach, or if you're going to follow the understanding that it's because of arla, which is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, so that also it's aser b'hana, so the cheese of Ovdei Kochavim should not just be aser to eat, it should be aser b'hana as well, and the Gemara says kasha, the Gemara leaves that as a difficulty. And Rashi explains, Bekatva de Gevaza, again, that's Bisraf Hayotze min ha'etz, that's the sap that actually comes from the tree. Aval Bekatva de Piri, but the sap that comes from the fruit. Bisraf HaPeri Atzmo, again, the sap that comes from the fruit itself, as the Gemara quoted from the Mishnah Meseches Orla, Bisraf HaPagin, let's say it's the sap that comes from the unripe figs, that's considered to be like fruit. And even Rabbi Yoshua would say that that is considered to be problematic. We'll also note over here that the Bach says, Rav Nachman Amar Mimnei Shemamid, and he has the gear, so not Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, but it's actually the answer of Rav Nachman again, that it's because they use the sap of the arla in order to make the cheese. And the Gemara continues, Darash Rav Nachman B'Reider Rav Chisda, Rav Nachman, the son of Rav Chisda, darshaned, Ma'idach Siv, what does it mean when it's written in the Pasuk in Shir Hashirim, L'reach Shemonecha Tovim, the smell of your ointments is good. L'ma Talmud Chacham Doma, what is a Talmud Chacham comparable to? L'tzluchas Shel Plaiton is comparable to a flask of Plaiton, Megula, when that's uncovered, Reicha Nodef, so then the smell diffuses, it spreads. Mechusa, but if it's covered, Ein Reicha Nodef, then the smell does not diffuse. V'lo Oda, not only that, Ela Dvarim Shemechusim Mimenu, the point over here is, if he spreads his Torah, it's a good thing, and when he spreads his Torah, things that are hidden from him, misgalin lo, then they're revealed to him. Shenemar, as the Pasuk says, the end of that Pasuk in Shir Hashirim, alamos ahivucha, the maidens love you, but we darshan it as follows, kori be alumos, we read it as alumos, the hidden things, they are revealed. V'lo oda, not only that, elasha malach hamavis ohavo, the malach hamavis, the angel of death, loves him. Shenemar, as it says, alamos ahivucha, kori be almavis, we can read alamos as al-mavis regarding death. V'lo oda, not only that, he inherits two worlds. Echad olam hazeh v'echad olam haba, he inherits this world and the next world. Shenemar, as it says, alamos, again, kari be olamos, you can read alamos as worlds. And Rashi explains, Megula Reicha Nodef, if it's uncovered, then the smell diffuses. V'hainu dichsiv, and that's what's written in the Pasuk, that same Pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Shemen Turak Shemecha, that your name is the finest oil. But we're darshaning Turak, it means Kishemegalinosa, when you reveal it, Umerikin Shamna, when you pour out the oil. Kilomar Kisha'atam Melame Torah, means to say, when you teach the Torah, L'talmidim, to students, Oz Yotzalach Hashem, then your name goes out. And Misgalin Lo, it's revealed to him, and Meyatzman, all of the hidden things are revealed on their own, below Torah, without any burden, keshehum melamdan, when he teaches them. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, V'elu devarim shalov de kochavim asurin ve'eni suran isur hana. The following things of idol worshippers are prohibited, but it's not a prohibition to get benefit. And they are as follows. Chalav shechelva over kochavim. Again, you have an animal that was milked by an idol worshipper, V'eni Yisrael roehu, and the Jew was not watching over, so it was a kosher animal, but it was the over kochavim who milked the animal, and the Jew was not watching. Ve'apas v'hashemen shalahen, and the bread and their oil of Ovid Kochavim. Rebbe Ubezdino, Hitiru Hashem, and Rebbe and his court, they allowed the oil. We'll see Rashi on that in a moment. V'hashlokos uchavoshin, and when it comes to things that are cooked or things that are pickled, shedarkon loses l'sochan yayin v'chometz, that it's the way to put into them wine and vinegar, and that's a problem of the wine of Ovdei Kochavim. And the Mishnah continues, V'taris, taris is a kind of fish, we'll see Rashi in a moment, trufa if it is minced, V'tzir she'ein bo daga kalbis shotetes bo, and fish brine which doesn't have kalbis fish floating in it. V'hachilek, and chilek, also a kind of fish we'll see in Rashi. V'koret shel chiltis, and a sliver of chiltis, and we'll see Rashi on that as well. And finally, umelach silicondis and silicondis salt, which will be explained in the Gemara. Hare elu asurin, these are all forbidden. Ve'eni surah isur hana, but they're forbidden to eat. But there's no isur to get hana, to get benefit. And Rashi explains, Rebbe Beis Dino hitiru es Hashem, and it said in the Mishnah that Rebbe in his court, they allowed the oil of Ovdei Kochavim. Rashi says, lo garsin, and this should not be in the text of our Mishnah. To halav yushari, it was not Rebbe that permitted it. Elo Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya bar berei, rather it was Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya, who's a different individual. That's the grandson of Rebbe Yehuda Nasi. Sharia, he's the one that permitted it. Kedamar b'Gemara, that's what it says in the Gemara. Mistamech v'yazor Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya, for Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya, the Gemara hainu Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi beno shel Rebbe Gamliel beRebbe. The Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya that's mentioned in the Gemara is the Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi that's the son of Rebbe Gamliel, the son of Rebbe Shahaya b'meho Amoraim. And this Rebbe Yehuda Nesiya, he lived during the times of the Amoraim. V'hachinami amrinan b'Gemara. This is what we say in the Gemara. Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi beno shel Rebbe Gamliel hora. It says Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi, the son of Rebbe Gamliel. V'ilu Rebbe, whereas when it comes to Rebbe, the one that we refer to as Rebbe Yehuda Hanasi of the Mishnah, he was beno shel Rebbe Shimon Gamliel haya. He was actually the son of Rebbe Shimon ben Gamliel. V'hashalakos, it said cooked items of Ovdei Kochavim, called davar shebishlo Ovdei Kochavim, anything that's cooked by an idol worshiper, ve'afilu bechlitar, even if it's in a kosher vessel, v'kulu misham chasnus, all of this is usher because of chasnus, because of a concern of intermarriage, uchevosh, and that refers to pickled items, lichvosh dogim v'yerek, that's when you pickle fish or vegetables, v'rosh v'raglaim shel behema b'chometz, or it could be the head or feet of an animal in vinegar, uteris, what is tris, min dogim ketanim meluchim, that's a kind of small fish that are salted, terufa, and they are minced, shenitrafu v'nishtabru hadogim, they're all broken up, ve'in nikarn, you can't really recognize them, hilkach chayshil itzmeim, that's why with regards to those, we're concerned for non-kosher fish mixed in, v'tzir she'ein badoga kalbis shotetas bo, if you have fish brine and it doesn't have the kalbis fish floating in it, shederech kalbis li godel me'eleh b'tzir shel dogim tahorim, because kalbis grows on its own within the fish brine of kosher fish, it's a sign that it's kosher. V'yim yesh tzir dog tame'imo, if you had a non-kosher fish there with the fish brine, lo tegadel kalbis bo, there would be no kalbis, v'yatzma tamei, it would be not kosher, so that's the reason, again, that's like a sign, if it doesn't have the kalbis in it, that's a sign that it's not kosher. V'hachilek, and chilek, what's that? Min dagim ketanim tahorim, this is a kind of kosher fish. V'i sultanis, this is sultanis, Rashi mentioned this a little earlier. V'ein los napir v'kaskeses, it doesn't have, when it's young, it doesn't have the fins and scales. V'yasel legadol achar zman, it grows the fins and scales later on. Snapir v'kaskeses, it grows those fins and scales later on. V'kaim alon demuteres, and the halacha is that, technically speaking, chilek is mutter. V'yamar v'gemara, and says in the Gemara, mimnei ma'asru, why did the Rabbanan say it's forbidden? Mimnei she'er because it would actually come up with a mixture of other fish. They would come up, dagim tameim hadomim lo. There would be non-kosher fish that look similar, and they would get all mixed up. Hilkach loshna trufa v'loshna ena trufa. That's why in this case it doesn't matter if it's minced or not. It doesn't matter if it's cut up or not. Ikol lemechash le'echan me'elef beineim. You have to be concerned. Maybe there's 1 in 1,000 among them. The damule, which looks just like the kosher fish, which is actually not kosher. V'lo minkrin, you don't recognize it. Avol teris, but when it comes to teris, ein sheketz domala, there's nothing not kosher similar. Hilkach kiena trufa shaya. That's why when it's not cut up, it's going to be permitted. And chiltis, what is chiltis? Min pirehu shekorin lizra balaz, that's a kind of fruit. Umechatchen es karotav besakin, and they would cut it with a knife. V'yasr mishum shamnunisa desakina. The reason they would cut it, and the slices, they would cut those slices with a knife, and the problem is the knife had certain non-kosher fat on it. That's why that was a problem. And finally, umelach slakondis mefar Gemara, that kind of salt will be explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Chalav l'mayin neichoshla, what's the concern when an idolater milks an animal? Imishal mechlufa, if we're concerned that he's going to switch the milk, he's going to switch the kosher milk for non-kosher milk, that should not be a concern. Tahar chivar tamei yarek, because kosher milk is white and non-kosher milk is green, so there should be no such concern whatsoever. V'imishum eruve, now if the issue is that maybe he'll mix in some non-kosher milk, so we have a very simple thing. Nekum, all we have to do is take the milk and try to curdle it into cheese. Because the master said, Chalav tar omed, Chalav tamei and omed, there's a general rule that kosher milk is able to curdle cheese, non-kosher milk is not able to curdle cheese, and so therefore, there's a simple test we can do in order to determine whether it's kosher milk or not. And the Gemara says, well, if you would use this milk for cheese, hachanami, actually it would be fine. If you were using this milk for cheese, there would be no problem whatsoever, because that's exactly what you would do. You would try to curdle the milk into cheese, and if it was successful, then you would know that it was kosher. But and here what are we talking about? He needs it for kimcha. That was a kind of food with actual milk, and so therefore he wants to use it as milk. He wants to use it as milk. It's problematic. Maybe you have non-kosher milk mixed in. But the Gemara says, v'nishkol minei kali, but why not just take a little bit of that milk, from that milk, v'nekum, and again use that to curdle cheese, and therefore you'll do it essentially as a test. You'll test out a little bit of the milk, make sure that it's able to make cheese, and therefore you understand that it's kosher milk, and then you can use the rest for what you want to use it for. But the Gemara says, no, kevan devitar nami ikenis yuve delo kaimi. It's not a good test at all, because by kosher milk, sometimes when you curdle with using kosher milk, some of the milk does not turn to cheese. It's not all 100% effective that it all turns into cheese. So therefore, so there's really no way to determine whether or not there's something mixed in here at all. That's not a good test, because if let's say it doesn't work, it could be it was kosher milk that just didn't work. Therefore, it's not really a good test. And if you want, I could say you could even say that it's problematic when I want to use all of this milk for cheese, because again, as we said earlier, sometimes you have little parts of the milk that don't turn to cheese. There are little drops there between the crevices, and therefore some of those drops might be not kosher, and that's why it's a problem. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "V'hapas, the bread of an Ovid Kochavim is aser." Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Yochanan. Rav Kahana says, Rav Yochanan says, "Pas lo hutra bebezin." The bread was not permitted by the court. The Gemara says, "Mechlal deikaman deshari." When you make a statement like that it's not permitted by the court, it sounds like there was someone that said that it was permitted. And the Gemara says, "In yes, techiyaser Rav Dimi Amar," because when Rav Dimi came, he said, "Pamachas yotza Rebbe l'sada." One time, Rebbe went out to the field. Vehevi Ovid Kochavim lefanav pas porni. And an Ovid Kochavim, an idolater, brought before him a saw of bread that was baked in a large baker's oven. Amar Rebbe, and Rebbe said, how beautiful is this bread? Maro Chachamim la'osra. Why is it that the Chachamim said it's forbidden? And the Gemara says, Maro Chachamim misham chasnas. What do you mean, why did they say it was forbidden? It was forbidden because of chasnas, because of intermarriage. Ela Maro Chachamim la'osra besada. Rather, what he asked is, why did the Chachamim see fit to say that it was prohibited in the field, out in the field? There's no concern of intermarriage. And Kisvurin ha'am hit Rebbe hapas. The people thought that Rebbe was saying that the bread was permitted. Velohi, but it's not true. Rebbe lo hitter hapas. Rebbe really did not allow the bread. And so in any case, the point is, there was a report that Rebbe had allowed the bread, and that's why the statement was made, pas lo hutra bebezin, that the bread was not permitted by the court. Rav Yosef v'itamer Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda Amar. Rav Yosef, and some say Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda says, lo kach hayamaisa. This is not exactly the episode that happened. Ela amru, rather they said as follows: Pamachas holach Rebbe l'makam echad. One time Rebbe went to a particular place. V'roa pas dochog l'talmidim. He saw that there was not enough bread for the students. Amar Rebbe said, ein kan palter. There's no baker over here. Kisvurin ha'am lomar palter Ovid Kochavim. The people thought he was saying a baker who was an Ovid Kochavim, an idolater, and apparently he was permitting that. V'hulo amar ela palter Yisrael, but he was really talking about a Jewish baker. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Chelbo says, Afilu l'man damar palter Ovid Kochavim, even according to the one who says that if an idolater is a baker, bread from there is fine. Lo amran ela deleka palter Yisrael. That's only true if there is no Jewish baker around. Avol b'mokom deika palter Yisrael. But if it's a place where there's a Jewish baker, lo, so then no, we would not permit it from a palter Ovid Kochavim. For Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, "Afilu l'man davar palter Ovid Kochavim." Even according to the one who says that bread that is baked by an idolatrous baker, hani mili besada. That's only true in a field. Avol be'ir lo, but to allow that in a city, we would not allow that misham chasnas, again because there's a problem of intermarriage. And the Gemara continues, Evo have menaches v'achal pas avei mitzri. Evo, he would be eating bread outside of the field. Rashi says menaches means noshech, he was biting and eating the bread. Avei mitzri means besados eitzel hamitzorim, by the boundaries of the field. That's where he was eating the bread, and this was bread of idolaters. Amar lehu Rava said to them, v'yitamer of Nachman bar Yitzchak. Some say it was Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak that said to them, he said to the Talmidim, Lo tishto, don't speak with him, to ka'achel lachma daramoy, because he's somebody who eats bread of the Arameans. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, V'hashemen shalahen, it says the oil of Ovdei Kochavim is aser. And shemen, when it comes to oil, Rav Amar Rav says, Daniel, Gazar Olav, it was Daniel that made that decree. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, And Rashi explains, Porni again, hu tanur shu gadol, that refers to a large oven, upiv min hatzad, and by those kind of large ovens, the opening is on the side. V'chol tanur sheb'mishnah katan hu makam shvisas beis kedeiros upiv lamala, the tanurs that are mentioned in the Mishnah are smaller and they have the openings on top. Li osra besada, again, the question was, why should it be prohibited in a field? To lekal amecha shlim shuchi, you don't have to be worried they'll be drawn after them in terms of intermarriage, dakroi bialmu, because that's something that doesn't happen very often, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph.